Good afternoon, Year One, and welcome to our history lesson for today. We're going to have a look at the Titanic. Now, we've been learning about the Titanic in English, and we are going to be learning about it in history too. That's our main history topic for this term. There's a magnificent picture of the Titanic. It was huge, wasn't it? The biggest ship ever built and unsinkable. Of course, we know that wasn't true now. We know that everything that floats, if it's not working properly, can sink. Doesn't matter how big, how luxurious, and how much money it cost. So let's go through the PowerPoint and have a look at what happened. A little bit about the Titanic. Here's some headlines the day after the Titanic sank. You can see this one here, Titanic sinks, 1,500 die. It was a tragedy. All those people lost their lives. A great loss of life, this one says, as the Titanic sinks. Worst ocean disaster in the world's history. The Titanic goes down with 1,341 lives are lost. Titanic sinks 4 hours after hitting iceberg. A great loss of life, and it was a tragedy. And the biggest tragedy is it all could have been avoided. So the Titanic was the biggest ship in the world. Some people thought she was the best ship ever built. She was said to be too strong to sink. She was unsinkable, or so they believed. The Titanic was built in Belfast, in Ireland, here in Northern Ireland over here. This is the UK, this is where we live. This is Belfast, where the Titanic was built. And it was built by a company called the White Star Line. And it set sail from Southampton in England on its maiden voyage on the 10th of April 1912. It went over to France, to Cherbourg, where more passengers got on. And then it sailed to Queenstown in Ireland. That was the last time it was ever near land. It set sail across the Atlantic Ocean on its way to New York. So Queenstown is in County Cork in Ireland, and it's now called Cobb. That's how you say it. Okay, this is a bigger picture of the journey. So this was where it was supposed to go. So it started in Southampton, it went to Cherbourg, over to Queenstown in Ireland there, and then it was supposed to go to Halifax and then finishing up in New York. Of course, we know now that it never made it. It sank, and it's about here in the middle of the ocean, never to be seen for until a long, long time. Many years later, 1985, it was next seen. When the passengers began their journey to New York, it was like a wonderful party on board. Everyone was having loads of fun. They thought they were making history because they were on the biggest unsinkable ship. They were going to make history, but not for the right reasons, really. The Titanic was like a floating palace. She was one of the first ships with a swimming pool, and she had beautiful golden chandeliers because many very wealthy people travelled on board the Titanic. They stayed in the upper deck, which was called the first class, and the poorer passengers stayed below deck, a long way below, in the third class. This was the grand staircase in the first class area of the ship. Very, very grand, very ornate, very beautiful. When it set sail across the Atlantic Ocean, it had 2,224 passengers on board, but it only had 16 lifeboats, and they could only hold 1,708 people altogether. The White Star Line knew that they should have had more lifeboats, but they didn't want the decks to look cluttered. and spoil the look of the ship. By the 14th of April, the Titanic was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The weather was clear, the stars glistened in the dark, cold sky, and shortly before midnight, a sailor spotted something in front of the ship. He couldn't really see it, but he knew it could only be one thing: an iceberg. Now, an iceberg is a huge floating piece of ice that's much bigger beneath the water than it is above it. You can only really see a small amount of the iceberg on top of the water. So underneath that, it would have been 5 or 6 times bigger, and it can really cause damage to a ship if it crashes into it. It was too late for the Titanic to turn away. It hit the iceberg, and the iceberg ripped a huge hole in the side of the ship, and the lower part of the ship began to fill with icy water. The nose of the Titanic began to disappear beneath the water. The stern, or the back of the ship, began to rise higher into the air, and in a few hours the ship would sink. The crew set off flares, or distress rockets, to let other ships know it needed help. Sailors on other ships saw the flares but thought that they were having fireworks during a party on board, so they just sailed past. The Titanic crew began to save people. Some had come out on deck when the ship hit the iceberg, but many were still below deck, in their beds, fast asleep, and they didn't think it was anything to worry about anyway. The band began to play music to calm the passengers. The sailors began to put people in lifeboats. Women and children went first, but there was not enough lifeboats for everybody on board. Also, in the panic, some lifeboats were lowered into the water with empty seats. They were half empty, some of them. And by the time all the lifeboats had been lowered, there were still 1,500 people on board. By 2 a.m, the passengers still on the sinking ship heard a terrible sound. The Titanic was ripping apart. People started to jump off the ship into the icy water, and the Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean round about 2:20 on the 15th of April 1912. The Titanic sank more than 2 miles to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Most of its passengers and crew died. Captain Smith went down with his ship. The people who were in the lifeboats were rescued by another ship called the Carpathia. Nobody knew where in the Atlantic the Titanic was until it was found 71 years after it sank. As a kid, a scientist, Robert Ballard, was interested in shipwrecks, and he especially loved reading about the Titanic. "My lifelong dream was to find the great ship," he said. He became an ocean explorer when he grew up. He visited underwater mountains in the middle of the Atlantic. He found giant worms that lived in the Pacific. But he never forgot his boyhood dream, and that was to find the Titanic. It seemed impossible, and some people said that the Titanic had been crushed. Others thought she'd broken into little pieces, and everyone agreed that the ship was far too deep to reach. But Ballard was determined. He took ships to where the Titanic had sunk. They used special tools to look around the ocean floor, and for weeks they found nothing. Then they sent down an underwater craft called Argo. Its cameras took videos of the ocean floor and sent it up to the ship. Again, they searched for several days and found nothing. Ballard was sure that he had failed, but shortly before midnight on September the 1st, he decided to get some sleep. He really needed it. Barely an hour later, someone woke him up. Metal objects were showing up on the screen, and these things could only have come from a boat. Soon, the team spotted a huge ship engine. They'd found the Titanic. Over the next few days, Argo circled the wreck. Ballard almost could not believe what he saw. Titanic's bow, or the front of the ship, was stuck in mud, yet the ship still looked huge. Ballard also found many sad reminders of the Titanic's passengers. He saw beds, suitcases, cups, and lots of shoes. It was almost like visiting a sunken museum. Before leaving, Ballard wanted to honour the tragic ship. He left a plaque to remember the people who had died. Aside from that, he left everything exactly as he had found it. And here's some of the pictures that the Argo took under the water of the ship. You can see like the front half there where the Titanic had broken in half. The back was quite a way away, I think over a mile away. The rudder that used to drive the ship, and the bow, the very front of the ship. And I think this is inside one of the cabins or the rooms. Now, oh, there's some more. Look, one of the shoes, a handbag. Oh, the plates, the dining plates, and even a chef's hat. Can you believe that they haven't all smashed? Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share our activity for today. Okay, so this is what we are going to do today. Now you can see on here I've got 6 pictures, and each picture has got a little description, but they're all mixed up. What I want you to do, if you can print it out, that would be brilliant, and cut them up and put them in the right order. If you can't, you can just maybe try and draw the pictures and write down what happened first. So which one would be first? Would it sink first? Would it break into 2? Will they find the wreck 71 years later first? Would it set off on its maiden voyage first? Which one would come first? And I want you to work out, and I want you to put all 6 things in order, in the correct order. Good luck with that. Don't forget to send it to me on Class Dojo. Thank you very much.